Most people think the debate about God is purely religious. They think it belongs in churches and theology books, not in classrooms or laboratories. But what if the most powerful evidence for God is not found in scripture or tradition, but in mathematics? Not faith, not feeling, not personal experience. Mathematics, the most precise, most certain, most universally agreed upon knowledge that human beings possess. The thing that everyone atheist, agnostic, Christian, Buddhist accepts as true. 2 + 2 = 4. Not sometimes. Not in certain cultures. Always. Everywhere. For everyone. What if that certainty, that beautiful, undeniable, universal certainty, is itself pointing towards something most people never expected? What if math is not just a tool we use to understand the universe, but a fingerprint left by the mind that made it? This is not a religious argument. This is a mathematical one. And by the end of this video, you will never think about numbers the same way again. The limits of science. Before we get into mathematics, we need to clear something up, because it is the source of enormous confusion in the modern world. Many people assume that science has replaced the need for God. They say science explains everything. They say religion is just primitive superstition that science has made unnecessary. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what science actually is and what it can actually do. Science is a method. It is a brilliant and extraordinarily successful method for investigating the natural world. You observe something, form a hypothesis, design an experiment, measure the results, and draw conclusions. That method has given us antibiotics, space travel, smartphones, and vaccines. It is one of the greatest achievements in human history. But notice what science requires: observation and measurement. Science works by examining things in the physical universe. It measures forces, particles, temperatures, distances, and chemical reactions. Science is by definition limited to the natural world. It cannot by its own method say anything about what might exist outside or beyond the natural world. The question of whether God exists is a question about whether a supernatural being exists. And science, by its own rules, has no tools to answer that question. Saying science disproves God is like saying a metal detector proves there is no music. The detector was never designed to find music. That does not mean music does not exist. It means you are using the wrong instrument. So if science cannot answer the question of God's existence, what can? That is where mathematics enters the conversation and where things become extraordinarily interesting. What is mathematics? Mathematics is the study of numbers, quantities, patterns, and logical relationships. It deals with things like prime numbers, geometric shapes, equations, and infinite series. And here is the first thing you need to understand about mathematics: it does not physically exist anywhere in the world. You have never seen the number 7. You have seen 7 apples, 7 people, 7 chairs. But the number 7 itself, the pure abstract concept, exists nowhere in the physical universe. You cannot touch it. You cannot weigh it. You cannot put it under a microscope. Mathematics exists entirely in the mind. It is a purely mental reality. A triangle is a mental concept, a three-sided figure with interior angles summing to exactly 180 degrees. That is true of every triangle that has ever existed or ever will exist. Not approximately true. Not true on average. Exactly true. Always. Without exception. And this perfect, universal, unchanging truth exists in no physical location. It cannot be measured by any scientific instrument. It simply is eternally, necessarily, and completely independent of whether any human mind ever discovers it. This is the opening move in the mathematical argument for God, and most people have never even noticed it. The mystery of mathematical reality. Here is the question that has haunted mathematicians and philosophers for centuries. Is mathematics something human beings invented, like language or money? Or is it something human beings discovered, like gravity or the moons of Jupiter? At first glance, it might seem like we invented it. We created the symbols, we developed the notation, we built the logical systems. But look more carefully and this view becomes very difficult to maintain. When mathematicians discovered that the square root of 2 is irrational, meaning it cannot be expressed as a fraction of 2 whole numbers, this was not a decision. It was a discovery. The ancient Greeks were shocked and disturbed by it. They did not choose it. They found it, whether they liked it or not. When Euclid laid out the geometry of flat space, he was not making it up. He was describing relationships that were already and necessarily true before he ever wrote them down. When mathematicians first explored the concept of prime numbers, numbers divisible only by themselves in 1, they found that primes are distributed across the number line in patterns so complex and so precise that mathematicians are still trying to understand them today. Nobody invented prime numbers. They are simply there, waiting to be found. in a place that has no physical location and no size and no mass. This is what philosophers call the problem of mathematical reality, and the most honest answer to it points in a direction that many people find deeply uncomfortable: the infinite nature of mathematics. Now here is where the argument becomes genuinely stunning. Mathematics is not just a large system, it is an infinite one. And not infinite in a vague, hand-waving sense, infinite in a precise, mathematical sense. Consider the number pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. Pi begins with 3.14159 and continues forever. Not for a very long time. Forever. Infinite non-repeating digits, stretching out beyond any possible end. Pi has been calculated to over 100 trillion decimal places, and it has never ended, never repeated, never settled into a pattern. The digits just keep going. Infinitely. Now consider this: somewhere in the infinite digits of pi, mathematically speaking, every possible sequence of numbers exists. Your phone number is in pi. Your birth date is in pi. Every possible combination of numbers, every piece of information that could ever be expressed numerically, is encoded somewhere in the infinite expansion of pi. This is not a religious claim. This is a mathematical fact. And it raises a profound question. Where is all of that infinite information? It is not in any physical location. Our entire observable universe is finite. The number of particles in the observable universe is estimated at around 10 to the power of 80. That is an enormous number, but it is a finite number. A number with an end. Pi has no end. The mathematical structure of pi contains more information than the entire physical universe can hold. This means pi, and mathematics generally, cannot be a product of the physical universe. It contains more information than the universe contains. It must originate from somewhere else. From something that is not bound by the finite limits of physical reality. From something that is, by definition, infinite. The Mandelbrot set. Perhaps the most breathtaking piece of evidence in the mathematical argument for God is something called the Mandelbrot set. It is one of the most famous objects in mathematics, and what it reveals will stop you in your tracks if you really understand it. The Mandelbrot set is generated by an extremely simple mathematical formula. You take a complex number, square it, add the original number, then repeat the process. You ask which starting numbers remain bounded under this process and which ones escape to infinity. The boundary between those two outcomes, the edge between bounded and unbounded, produces a shape when graphed on the complex plane, and that shape is the Mandelbrot set. Here is where it becomes almost impossible to believe what you are seeing. When you zoom into the edge of the Mandelbrot set with a computer, plotting the calculation at millions of points, what you find is infinite complexity. Not complexity that eventually runs out. Not patterns that eventually repeat and simplify. Infinite, endlessly varied, astonishingly beautiful complexity. As you zoom deeper and deeper into the boundary of the Mandelbrot set, new structures appear: spirals within spirals, seahorse shapes, elephants, intricate filigrees, none of which were put there by the person who wrote the formula. The formula is 5 characters long, and it generates infinite complexity. Structures that no mathematician could anticipate or design. Patterns that appear to have been placed there by a mind of infinite creativity and infinite detail, patterns discovered only when you look closely enough. The Mandelbrot set contains information that no human being put into it. It contains beauty that no human being designed. It was not created by the mathematician who described it. It was found, waiting, inside a 5-character equation, with infinite depth. This is not a coincidence. This is an argument. Mathematics cannot come from the physical universe. Let us now put these observations together and make the argument explicit. Mathematics is infinite. The physical universe is finite. An infinite system cannot originate from a finite source. Therefore, mathematics cannot originate from the physical universe. It must originate from something outside the physical universe, something that is itself not limited by the finite constraints of physical reality. Now, what kind of thing exists outside the physical universe? What kind of thing is infinite? Infinite in knowledge, infinite in power, infinite in existence? What kind of thing could contain all of mathematical reality, all possible patterns, all possible relationships, all possible truths, within itself? The answer that the greatest mathematicians in history have converged on, Pythagoras, Plato, Leibniz, Cantor, Gödel, is that mathematical reality exists in a mind, not a physical brain. A mind that is prior to and independent of the physical universe. A mind that is itself the source of mathematical truth. Galileo said the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. What he meant was that the physical universe operates according to mathematical laws, and those laws were there before the universe began. The fine structure constant. The gravitational constant. The speed of light. The mathematical relationships that govern every particle and force in existence were already fixed, mathematically precise to extraordinary decimal places, before a single atom came into being. Someone wrote those equations before the universe existed to be governed by them. And the one who writes the equations of a universe, the one whose mind contains the infinite mathematical reality that structures and governs all of physical existence, is, by every historic definition of the word, God. Gödel's incompleteness and the limits of human reason. One of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century, Kurt Gödel, proved something in 1931 that shook the foundations of mathematics and has profound implications for the question of God. Gödel's incompleteness theorems demonstrate that within any consistent mathematical system, there are true statements that cannot be proven within that system. In other words, every finite rational system contains truths that transcend the system itself. You cannot capture all mathematical truth within any closed logical framework. Some truths are always beyond reach, true, but unprovable from within. What this means philosophically is extraordinary. Even mathematics, the most precise and certain form of human knowledge, cannot be made complete from the inside. There are always truths that point beyond the system. The human mind, working within the finite system of natural reason, will always encounter truths that exceed its capacity to fully contain or prove. Gödel himself was a theist. He believed that his incompleteness theorems pointed toward a reality beyond the grasp of finite human reasoning, a reality of infinite truth that no finite mind could fully encompass. He even developed a formal ontological argument for the existence of God using modal logic that has been verified by computer as mathematically valid. A computer confirmed that Gödel's logical argument for God's existence is formally valid. You can disagree with the premises, but you cannot say the argument is illogical. The most rigorous logician of the 20th century could not escape the conclusion that something beyond the finite was necessary to account for mathematical reality. Mathematics, morality, and the mind of God. Here is the final and perhaps most personal dimension of this argument. We have been talking about mathematical truth, the kind of truth that lives in equations and geometric proofs. But there is another kind of truth that works in exactly the same way. Moral truth. When you say that torturing an innocent child for entertainment is wrong, you do not mean it is merely your opinion. You mean it is actually wrong. Objectively. Regardless of what anyone thinks. Regardless of what culture you were raised in. Regardless of what laws exist in any particular country. The wrongness of torturing an innocent child is not a human invention. It is a discovery. Just like the irrationality of the square root of 2 was a discovery. Just like the infinite complexity of the Mandelbrot set was a discovery. Moral truths, like mathematical truths, exist independently of human minds. They were true before humans existed to discover them. They are true in the same way that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is true, not because anyone decided it, but because it simply is. And if moral truths exist independently of the physical universe, just as mathematical truths do, then they too must be grounded in a mind that transcends physical reality. A mind in which mathematical truth and moral truth and all forms of objective truth are unified. A mind that is infinite in knowledge. Infinite in goodness. The source and ground of all that is true and beautiful and right. This is what the greatest thinkers in history have meant when they spoke of God. Not a tribal deity or a cosmic policeman. But the infinite mind in which all truth, mathematical, moral, aesthetic, has its source and its home. We started with a simple question: can mathematics tell us anything about whether God exists? And what we found is that mathematics does not just suggest God exists. It demands an explanation that points powerfully in that direction. Mathematical reality is infinite. The universe is finite. Infinite reality cannot come from a finite source. Mathematical truth exists independently of human minds and independently of the physical universe. The Mandelbrot set reveals infinite complexity hidden in a 5-character equation, complexity no human designed. Gödel proved that mathematical truth always exceeds the grasp of any finite logical system. And moral truth operates by the same logic as mathematical truth: objective, universal, and independent of human opinion. All of this points to the same conclusion: there is an infinite mind that is the source and ground of all mathematical, moral, and logical truth. And that infinite mind is what every serious theistic tradition in human history has meant by the word God. You can reject that conclusion, but you cannot do it cheaply. You cannot simply say science has disproved God, because science cannot even address the question. You have to grapple with the mathematics. You have to explain where infinite mathematical reality comes from, if not from an infinite mind. You have to explain why the universe is governed by mathematical laws that were written before the universe existed. These are not easy questions. They are the most important questions any human being can ask. And the mathematical evidence suggests that the answer, the real answer, is a person. Not a principle. Not a force. Not an abstraction. A mind. Infinite in knowledge, infinite in power, infinite in goodness. The one who wrote the equations that hold the universe together. And who knows your name?